14 years. That is how long a curse can feed before someone finally arrives to break it. How long a king can hope while bodies piled in darkness. How long reality needs to forget what a person was and remember only what they have become. The mages came first, with their theories and structured spells and centuries of accumulated knowledge. They failed. The druids came next, working with older magics, patterns cut into oak at specific moon phases. They failed. One witcher tried. His horse was found 3 days later, wandering the outskirts with saddlebags still packed and silver sword still sheathed. The witcher himself left no trace. 14 years of hunting. Over 700 nights when the full moon rose and the sarcophagus opened and something that had once been a princess climbed out to feed. The old palace at Vizima became a memorial to what could not be fixed, what could not be killed, what simply persisted year after year while the living learned to root around it. Then Geralt of Rivia arrived in the autumn of 1252, not because he possessed superior methodology, not because he knew secrets the mages had missed, but because he understood something about timing that would determine whether the girl could be saved or whether she had already become only the curse wearing her shape. The sarcophagus opened, not once, not twice, 14 times across 14 years. The stone lid scraped back, and what climbed out wore the shape of hunger more than anything human. The old palace at Vizima stood empty. The courtyards where musicians once played lay silent under accumulated leaves. In the catacombs below, where kings and queens had been laid to their final rest, something else slept. During the day, only stone and darkness. At night, when the full moon rose, the crypt breathed differently. Accounts from those who survived describe a creature that moved like famine given flesh. 4 limbs drove it forward. Claws capable of piercing bone extended from fingers that remembered, perhaps, what hands had been. The jaw opened wider than anatomy should allow, revealing rows of teeth that served only one purpose. She fed. The bodies piled over time. Guards who thought duty stronger than terror. Hunters who believed silver and prayer sufficient. One account, preserved in the records of Vizima's Castellan, mentions a miller who survived long enough to reach the city walls. His wounds told their own story. Deep lacerations, bite marks, the tearing pattern of something that did not kill cleanly or quickly. This was not predation. Predators kill for need. This was something else. The curse had been cast with intention. Strong will created it, as witchers say. Someone wanted this. Not the deaths themselves, perhaps, but the transformation, the unmaking of what had been. The records dispute who spoke the words. One version names Ostrit, a magnate of Temeria, a man who loved where love was not returned. Another whispers of Queen Sansia, who saw her children's transgression and responded with a mother's rage turned inward. Whichever account holds truth, the result remained the same. Princess Ada of Temeria died during childbirth. Her infant daughter, also named Ada, died with her. They were placed together in a single sarcophagus. The priest performed the rites. The stone was sealed. For 7 years, nothing stirred. Then the seal broke from within. The creature that emerged had grown, not as children grow, cell by cell through years of sunlight and meals. This growth occurred in darkness, feeding on what remained of its mother's corpse. When it finally clawed free, it stood as tall as a 14-year-old girl might stand. If girls had double rows of teeth and moved on all fours and existed only to devour. King Foltest called for help. Mages arrived first. They brought knowledge accumulated across centuries, spells preserved in grimoires, rituals tested against lesser curses. The exact number who attempted cure remains unrecorded, though accounts reference multiple failures. The methods varied, reflecting different schools of magical thought and different theories about curse structure. Some approaches focused on barrier magic, attempting to contain the Striga during transformation, to trap it in a state between forms where the curse might be more vulnerable to unweaving. Others tried dispellation, treating the curse as continuous magic that could be interrupted through counterspells. Still others attempted to trace the curse back to its source, to find and sever the connection between the transformation and the will that had created it. All failed. The records do not specify why, though the pattern of failure suggests certain conclusions. Curses respond to will and intention more than to structured magic. A mage approaching curse breaking as an intellectual problem, with theory and precedent and careful methodology, may miss the fundamental nature of what they face. The curse was not cast through theory. It was cast through emotion, through hatred and jealousy and rage, focused to a point sharp enough to pierce reality. Matching that intensity requires something mages do not typically cultivate, not knowledge, not skill, but the willingness to meet will with will, to impose conviction against conviction, to refuse the curse's claim on reality through sheer stubborn insistence that the claim is false. This suggests why the mages failed despite their expertise. They possessed knowledge. They lacked the particular kind of conviction needed to break a curse born from absolute emotion. Druids came next. Their approach differed from the mages. Where wizards relied on structured spells and mathematical precision, druids worked with older things, natural forces, the rhythms that govern transformation and renewal. One account attributes to them an attempt involving oak branches cut at specific moon phases, arranged in patterns meant to redirect curse energy back to its source. This also failed. The deaths continued. The old palace became a place of ghosts and warnings. Parents used it to frighten children into obedience. Merchants refused contracts that would require them to pass nearby after dark. The military stationed guards at a safe distance, not to contain the threat, but to mark where safety ended, and the killing ground began. King Foltest offered rewards: gold, titles, land. The promise drew many. Most turned back before attempting entry. Those who did not turn back did not return. One witcher tried. The records preserve only fragments. His school remains unclear. The description mentions a medallion, but not its shape. He arrived 6 years after the curse manifested. He examined the scene. He consulted with Foltest's advisors. He prepared his equipment. He entered the crypt. 3 days later, his horse was found wandering the outskirts of Vizima. The saddlebags remained packed. The silver sword still hung from its saddle sheath. The witcher himself left no trace. Velerad, the burgomaster who later chronicled these events for official records, noted that the witcher had been paid in advance. The implication hung unspoken, that he had fled rather than face what dwelt below? Perhaps. Or perhaps the Striga caught him before he could implement whatever plan he had formed. Either way, the pattern held. The curse proved stronger than those who challenged it. Foltest aged. His sister's death had occurred when he was young, when kings could still believe in solutions and happy endings. 14 years of failure taught different lessons. The city adapted to the presence of death at its center. Trade routes adjusted. The palace became a memorial to what had been lost and what could not be recovered. Then another witcher arrived. Geralt of Rivia came to Vizima during the autumn of what would later be marked as year 1252. The circumstances of his arrival remain partially obscured. One account suggests he had been investigating other contracts in the region. Another implies he had heard of the reward and sought it deliberately. The details matter less than what followed. He met with Velerad, who by this time had perfected the careful language officials use when describing situations they cannot control. The burgomaster outlined the facts: the creature, the failed attempts, the king's specific requirement that if the curse could be lifted, it must be lifted. If death became necessary, it should come as a last resort. Foltest himself met with the witcher. The meeting occurred in the newer palace, the one built at a safe distance from the old. Accounts describe a king worn by grief, but not broken by it. He loved his daughter, this girl he had never truly known, this child born from transgression who had never drawn free breath. He loved her enough to hope. Hope, despite 14 years of evidence suggesting hope served no purpose. Geralt listened. He asked questions that revealed careful thinking. Not, can the curse be broken? But, rather, under what specific conditions might breaking it become possible? The answer existed in accumulated knowledge. Multiple failed attempts by mages and druids and witchers had at least established what did not work, and in the spaces between failures, patterns emerged. The Striga hunted during full moons. She required her sarcophagus. The connection between creature and crypt ran deeper than simple shelter. She had to return before dawn. When sunrise came, she descended back into darkness, whether her hunger had been satisfied or not. This suggested vulnerability. Keep her from the sarcophagus until morning. Deny her the one thing she could not be denied. Force the curse to break against the simple fact of sunlight and a sealed crypt. Simple in theory. In practice, it meant surviving a full night against something that had killed every challenger it faced. It meant physical endurance measured in hours rather than minutes. It meant facing a creature designed by cursecraft to be nearly unkillable, while possessing the discipline not to kill it in return. The old palace waited. The full moon approached. Geralt prepared his equipment, potions whose ingredients required specific timing to harvest and combine, oils for his silver blade, signs practiced until they operated faster than conscious thought. On the night selected, he entered the crypt alone. The darkness below ground held different qualities than darkness above, thicker, more present, the kind that pressed against consciousness and whispered that turning back remained an option, right up until the moment it ceased being one. Geralt found the sarcophagus. The stone showed signs of repeated opening, scratches, wear patterns. The slow erosion of something heavy moved in the same way many times. He examined the space, noted the bloodstains, the scattered bones, some so old they had turned gray, others recent enough to still carry meat. Then he waited. The transformation did not announce itself with drama, no thunder, no mystical light. The stone simply moved. The lid scraped aside with a sound of granite against granite. What emerged wore the shape of every nightmare that had passed through Vizima's collective consciousness for 14 years. The battle that followed would later become the opening sequence for a certain popular game adaptation. The details compressed into cinematic violence. The Witcher dancing between strikes, signs blazing, silver flashing in witchlight, the beast's relentless assault. The reality was slower, more grinding. Hours passed in that darkness. Geralt fought not to kill, but to survive. The Striga fought to feed and to return to her rest. Neither could afford decisive action. The Witcher who struck too hard would end the curse with the victim's death. The Striga who caught her prey would feast and then retreat before dawn. The standoff stretched. Geralt bled from a dozen wounds. The Striga's claws had opened his shoulder, torn his side, left marks that would scar even through Witcher healing. He gave back damage in return. Silver cut deep, signs through the creature against walls. Ard blasted her away from the sarcophagus. When she tried to retreat, the critical moment came as dawn approached. The Striga sensed it before Geralt did. Her attacks intensified. Desperation replaced calculation. She needed her crypt. The compulsion drove her harder than hunger ever had. Geralt sealed the sarcophagus. Not permanently, not with magic that would hold past dawn, just enough to delay, to force her to fight for access, to make returning take long enough that the sun would rise first. She tried. Her claws tore at the stone. Her strength, which had killed so many, proved insufficient against rock sealed by Witcher signs. The rage in her howls held something beyond animal fury, something that recognized what was happening, what was being lost. Dawn came. The light did not reach the crypt directly, but something changed. The air, the quality of darkness, the way sound carried. The moment arrived when night ended and day began, and the curse faced a contradiction it could not resolve. The Striga stood outside her sarcophagus. Dawn had come. By the curse's own logic, this was impossible. She could not exist in this state. She must return before dawn. The curse required it, but she existed anyway. Reality encountered a choice: maintain the curse and accept the contradiction, or resolve the contradiction by remembering what the girl had been before the curse remade her. In that moment, reality chose memory. The transformation reversed. Not smoothly, not gently. The creature collapsed, convulsed. The body fought against change that should not be possible. Bones shifted, teeth receded, claws became fingers. The process took minutes that felt longer. Minutes where Geralt could not be certain which way the change would go. Then it finished. A girl lay on the stone floor, naked, unconscious, 14 years old in body. Though she had never lived those years, her mind would be damaged, her recovery incomplete. She would need protection for the rest of her life. Sapphire amulets, rituals, constant vigilance against relapse. But she lived. She breathed. She was human. The curse had broken. Geralt had succeeded where mages and druids and another Witcher had failed. Not because his methodology differed dramatically, not because he possessed superior power, but because he had arrived at the right moment. when the curse was strong enough to pose a challenge but not so strong that it had erased Ada entirely, when reality still remembered what she had been clearly enough to choose that memory over the curse's declaration. He had found the gap, the weakness in Ostrit's curse, the contradiction buried in hatred that had not been quite absolute, and he had exploited it for the single night required. The word carries weight beyond its letters. Striga. In Polish, Striga, the pronunciation matters less than what the sound evokes. Something harsh, something that catches in the throat. The term predates the events at Vizima by centuries. It predates the arrival of humans on the continent entirely, carried with them from their original world, from a place where such creatures walk not as curse-born monsters, but as natural consequences of birth gone wrong. The folklore origins trace through linguistic archaeology, Latin strix, a screech owl, a night bird that fed on human flesh. The Romans inherited the concept from the Greeks, who knew the creature as a predator that wore the mask of woman during daylight and hunted as something else when darkness came. The word traveled through Balkan territories into Slavic languages. Each culture that touched it added layers of meaning, adjustments to fit local understanding of how death worked and what came after. In Romanian lands, it became strigoi, the troubled dead, those who rose from graves to drain life from the living. In Albanian tradition, Striga represented witches who transformed into insects to feed on children during sleep. Each iteration preserved the core concept, something that appeared human but fed on humanity, something that walked the boundary between life and death without fully belonging to either state. By the time the concept settled into Polish tradition, the Strzyga had become specific, not merely a vampiric entity, not simply the undead, something particular, a person born with two hearts, two souls, two sets of teeth, the second row barely visible behind the first. The folklore marks such individuals from birth, physical anomalies that suggested division at the deepest level. The condition was not chosen. No ritual created it. No curse imposed it. The child simply arrived bearing marks that foretold what would come. These signs varied in different regional traditions across Poland and neighboring territories. Some accounts emphasized the double teeth, a second row that emerged behind the first during infancy, small and barely visible but present. Others focused on the presence of two hearts beating within a single chest, a phenomenon midwives might detect if they listened carefully enough. Still others mentioned additional markers, eyes of mismatched colors, hair that grew in unusual patterns, with cowlicks that suggested wrong orientation, birthmarks shaped like specific symbols, crescents, stars, crosses inverted. The common thread was duality. Something fundamental about the person existed in doubled form, as though the process that should have created one individual had instead created something incomplete. Two souls sharing space meant for one, two hearts dividing the blood that should flow through a single organ, two sets of teeth suggesting two different appetites. In some accounts, these marked individuals lived normal spans. They functioned within their communities, married, worked, died like anyone else. The difference emerged only after death. One soul departed to whatever realm souls inhabit. The other remained, trapped within the cooling flesh, unable to leave, unable to rest. This is when the transformation occurred. The body rose, not as it had been, but altered, stronger, hungrier. The second soul, bound to deteriorating meat, drove the corpse to feed. Human blood satisfied it, human organs. The creature that resulted hunted during darkness, often taking the form of an owl to fly between hunting grounds. During daylight, it might still appear human. Pale skin, described in various accounts as grayish or bluish, as though the flesh had forgotten how living tissue should look. The pallor of death that remained despite movement and speech. Eyes that gleamed with something not quite right, reflecting light in ways human eyes should not. A quality of wrongness that animals sensed immediately, but humans might rationalize away if they wanted to believe the person had simply recovered from illness, but functional enough to pass if one did not look too closely. If the Striga maintained sufficient recent feeding to preserve the appearance of life, if those who encountered it wanted to believe their loved one had returned, rather than something wearing their loved one's face. At night, the mask fell away. The transformation into owl form features prominently in many accounts, though whether this represented literal shapeshifting or served as metaphorical description of the creature's silent flight, and nocturnal hunting patterns remains open to interpretation. Accounts describe wings emerging from shoulder blades, feathers sprouting along arms, the face elongating into something between human and bird, the eyes enlarging to capture more light, the transformation complete within minutes, leaving something that could fly and hunt with predatory efficiency. What the folklore consistently emphasizes is the Strzyga's predatory nature once darkness came. The feeding, the violence, the systematic hunting of those closest in life, family first, then neighbors, then anyone within reach. The pattern had logic. The creature remembered, in whatever capacity remained to it, the relationships that had defined its living existence. It knew where family slept. It could navigate familiar streets in darkness. It understood which windows would open easily and which required force. The first victims were almost always immediate family, parents, siblings, spouses, children, those who had shared space and meals and breath with the person who had been, those who might hesitate when confronted with something that wore a familiar face. Even if that face had wrong, the hesitation killed them. After family came neighbors, the pattern expanding outward from the Striga's original home like ripples in disturbed water. Each night, the hunting range grew wider. Each feeding gave strength. Each kill eliminated someone who might recognize the creature and warn others. Eventually, the entire community would be haunted. No one could sleep safely. No luck proved sufficient. No prayer offered protection. The Strzyga hunted until it was destroyed, or until the settlement emptied entirely, the living fleeing and leaving their homes to the dead. The Polish tradition developed specific protections in response. When someone suspected of bearing the double-souled condition died, communities took precautions. The body was buried face down, based on the belief that if the corpse tried to rise, it would dig downward rather than toward the surface. The logic was simple. If the dead forgot which direction led to life, let them dig toward the center of the earth until exhaustion or depth prevented further progress. A sickle placed near the neck created a trap. Movement would result in decapitation. The tool's curve meant that any attempt to rise would draw the blade across the throat. Some accounts specify that the sickle should be positioned with the cutting edge toward the body, others that it should be placed flat with the neck resting on the blade. Either way, the principle remained. Make resurrection cost the creature its head. Hawthorn stakes driven through the heart to pin both souls. The wood mattered. Hawthorn carried significance in multiple European traditions, a plant associated with boundaries between worlds, with protection against malevolent spirits, with the capacity to hold things that should not exist. The stake needed to pierce the heart specifically because that organ housed the souls. Pin one heart, both souls remain trapped. If the Strzyga had two hearts, some traditions specified two stakes, positioned to pierce both, or most decisively, immediate decapitation with the head buried separately from the body, far enough apart that reunion became impossible. The distance varied by account. Some said the head should be buried at the opposite end of the cemetery from the body. Others specified that it should be taken to a different village entirely, or buried at a crossroads where the confused spirit would not know which direction led back to its corpse. A few accounts mentioned burial in running water, the current carrying any lingering intention downstream and away. These were not acts of cruelty, but of community protection. The Strzyga hunted its own first. Family members, neighbors, those closest in life became targets in death. The protective measures acknowledged this pattern. Better to prevent the rising than to face the creature after transformation completed. The folklore also noted resistance to conventional destruction. Stakes might pin the body temporarily, but unless properly placed through the heart, and the accounts specify this needed to be hawthorn, not just any wood, the creature would eventually work free. The strength granted by undeath allowed it to push against the stake, working it loose millimeter by millimeter over nights or weeks, until finally the binding failed and the Strzyga rose again. Fire worked, but only if the burning continued until nothing remained. But ash, partial burning might leave enough intact that regeneration became possible. Some accounts describe Striga surviving with bodies charred beyond recognition, hunting despite flesh that hung in blackened strips, feeding until enough blood and meat had been consumed to rebuild what fire had taken. Even complete burning came with warnings. The ashes needed proper disposal, scattered to running water or mixed with salt, and buried in consecrated ground. Left in a heap, even ashes might reform given sufficient time and malevolent will. Beheading proved most reliable, provided the separation was maintained, and both parts were destroyed or buried so distant from each other that no possibility of reunion existed. But even this came with risks. The head might continue to bite. The body might crawl, searching blindly for what it had lost. Complete destruction required both parts be burned separately or buried with sufficient depth and distance that neither could affect the living world. What the folklore rarely mentioned was cure. The Striga represented a condition, not a curse. One might as well attempt to cure death itself. The person who had been was gone. What remained wore their face but operated according to different principles. The predatory impulse, the need to feed, the transformation each night into something built for killing. No ritual could restore what death had claimed. No prayer could convince the trapped soul to depart. The division that had existed from birth had simply manifested in its final form. The second soul, unable to leave, drove the corpse through an existence that was neither life nor true death, but something suspended between. This tradition existed long before Andrzej Sapkowski began writing. When he constructed the mythology of the Witcher, he drew from this wellspring but made crucial alterations. In Sapkowski's version, the Striga becomes curse-born rather than birth-determined. The transformation requires intent. Someone must cast the curse. Strong will must shape it. The victim does not carry the condition from birth, but receives it through malevolent magic. This change fundamentally alters what the Striga represents. In folklore, the Strzyga embodies fate, the unlucky accident of being born wrong, the tragedy of a condition no one chose. In The Witcher, the Striga embodies choice, someone's deliberate decision to transform another person into a monster. The curse becomes a weapon, a tool of revenge or hatred or political manipulation. The mechanics shift as well. Folkloric Strzygas hunt generally, driven by hunger without pattern. Sapkowski's Strigas hunt during full moons specifically. They require their burial places. They maintain a connection to their crypts that functions as both weakness and necessity. Most significantly, Sapkowski introduces the possibility of cure. The method appears straightforward. Keep the Striga from its sarcophagus until the third crowing of the rooster, until dawn breaks and sunlight touches the world. Do this, and the curse shatters. The girl returns. Straightforward in description, brutal in execution. The books acknowledge that exceptions exist. Geralt tells Foltest directly, some cases require not one night, but 3 consecutive nights. Some cases prove hopeless from the start, beyond any cure, doomed to remain monsters until death finally claims them. The books do not explain why some Strigas can be saved, while others cannot. This ambiguity is not narrative carelessness, but recognition of a deeper truth. Curses operate according to the will that shapes them. A curse cast in momentary anger differs from one crafted with meticulous hatred. A curse imposed by accident carries different weight than one designed with precision. Ostrit's curse fell somewhere in the middle. What is known from the accounts, he loved Ada, the king's sister. He wanted Foltest to suffer for taking her from him. He performed an elven ritual, the specific words lost or deliberately not preserved in records. He intended the curse to strike Foltest. Instead, it rebounded or redirected to Ada and her unborn child. Whether this represented failure in execution, or whether some protective ward around Foltest deflected the curse toward softer targets, remains disputed. The result stands clear regardless. Ada the Elder died in childbirth. Her daughter died with her. Both remained dead for 7 years. Then the curse activated. The infant had grown in death, feeding on her mother's corpse, developing in darkness and rage, and the twisted intention that had created her transformation. When she finally emerged, she carried all the marks of a folkloric Strzyga, the double teeth, the predatory nature, the need to feed, but she also remained bound by curse mechanics rather than folkloric rules. This is why she could be cured. The curse had been cast with strong will, yes, but not with perfect will. Ostrit had not intended to create a Striga. His aim had been elsewhere. The transformation of Ada the Younger was collateral damage, a side effect rather than the primary purpose. This distinction matters. A curse cast with absolute focus, with the caster's entire being directed toward one specific outcome, becomes nearly impossible to break. The will that shaped it acts as constant reinforcement. Even after the caster dies, the curse persists, fed by the intensity of its original creation. A curse cast with divided attention with partial focus, with some portion of the caster's will directed elsewhere. This kind of curse has weaknesses, gaps in its structure, moments when the binding loosens. Geralt succeeded because Ostrit's curse contained such gaps. He succeeded because he understood what others had not, that the battle was not primarily physical, that surviving the night mattered more than winning the fight, that the goal was not to kill the monster, but to deny it the one thing it believed it could not be denied. And he succeeded because he intervened at the right time, before the curse had progressed beyond reversal, before Ada had been completely erased by what she had become, before the hatred that created the transformation had solidified into something absolute. This timing was not luck. It was assessment, the kind of assessment that separates witchers who survive from witchers who do not. Geralt told Foltest the truth plainly. Some cases are hopeless, not difficult, not dangerous, though danger is always present. Hopeless, meaning that no methodology, no matter how perfectly executed, can restore what has been lost. The curse has progressed beyond the threshold where cure retains meaning. He spoke from experience, though the specific encounters that taught him this remain unrecorded in any formal sense. Witchers do not maintain detailed archives of their contracts. They carry knowledge forward through training and oral tradition. When a witcher identifies a hopeless case, that assessment travels informally through the schools, becoming part of accumulated practical wisdom. Young witchers learn this lesson through carefully chosen words from their masters. Not every monster can be saved. Not every curse can be broken. Sometimes the kindest action is quick death, rather than failed cure. The assessment matters more than the methodology, knowing when to try and when to walk away, or when to simply end it. This knowledge separates witchers who survive decades from witchers who die attempting the impossible. The reasons why some curses become impossible to break must be inferred from what is known about how curses function. Magic operates through the manipulation of chaos, the primordial force underlying reality. Mages shape this force according to will and knowledge. Spells channel chaos temporarily into specific effects: fire, healing, protection. Each spell imposes structure on formlessness, then releases that structure when the effect completes. A fire spell exists in stages. The mage draws chaos, shapes it according to learned formulas, directs it toward a target. The chaos becomes flame. The flame burns until the structured chaos dissipates back into the formless sea from which it came. Minutes later, no trace remains, except the physical effects the fire produced: charred wood, melted metal, burned flesh. The spell itself is gone. Chaos has returned to its natural state. The mage must cast again to produce more fire. The magic does not linger, does not persist, accomplishes its purpose and dissolves. Healing works similarly. The mage channels chaos into accelerating natural processes. Cell regeneration that would take days occurs in minutes. The wound closes, the bone knits. The effect completes and the magic dissipates. The healing remains, but the spell does not. Curses work differently. Where spells impose temporary order, curses embed intention directly into reality surrounding the victim. The transformation persists not through continuous magical sustenance, but because reality itself has been persuaded to accept the cursed state as the natural state. The victim becomes what the curse declares them to be. Existence agrees with that declaration. This is not metaphor, but mechanism. Reality on the continent, perhaps on all worlds, though knowledge beyond the continent remains limited, operates through consensus. What exists is what existence recognizes as existing. A stone is stone because reality accepts stoneness as a valid category. A person is person for the same reason. The categories are not arbitrary, but they are also not immutable. Magic works by temporarily convincing reality to accept altered categories. A spell that turns lead to gold convinces reality that this particular piece of lead is actually gold. The conviction lasts as long as the spell maintains its structure. When the spell ends, reality reverts to its previous understanding. The lead becomes lead again. But if the conviction can be made permanent, if reality can be thoroughly persuaded that the altered state is the true state, then the change persists without continued magical effort. This is what curses accomplish. The caster does not merely transform the victim. The caster restructures how reality understands the victim. The magic does not maintain the transformation. The transformation maintains itself because reality has been taught that this is what the victim is. A person cursed to become a Striga doesn't change back when the spell ends, because there is no spell to end. There is only reality's revised understanding that this person is Striga, has always been Striga. The human form that existed before was the aberration. The monster is the truth. Breaking a curse requires convincing reality otherwise, demonstrating that the cursed form represents aberration rather than truth. This is why the cure methodology works the way it does. The Striga must return to her sarcophagus before dawn. This is not merely instinct or habit. It is a fundamental rule of what the Striga is. Reality understands that Strigas hunt at night and rest in their crypts during day. This understanding is part of the curse structure, part of how reality has been taught to recognize the cursed individual. When a witcher keeps the Striga from her sarcophagus until dawn arrives, reality encounters a contradiction it cannot resolve while maintaining the curse. The Striga exists outside her crypt. Dawn has come. By the curse's own logic, this is impossible. She must return before dawn. Cannot survive exposure to daylight outside her resting place. The curse's own rules state this explicitly, but she exists anyway. The Witcher has forced the contradiction into manifestation. Reality must choose. Either maintain the curse and accept the impossible contradiction, or resolve the contradiction by abandoning the curse, by remembering what the victim was before the curse reshaped understanding. If the curse is young enough, if reality still retains clear memory of the original state, if the victim has not been so thoroughly subsumed that nothing remains to remember, then reality makes the second choice. The curse breaks because reality decides the cursed state is false. The victim returns because reality returns to its previous understanding of what the victim is. This is why timing matters so crucially. When a curse persists long enough, reality's memory of the original state fades. What the victim was becomes less clear, less certain, less real. The cursed state, reinforced night after night through the victim's actions and existence, becomes more solid, more true, more fundamentally what reality understands this person to be. Eventually, memory fails entirely. Reality no longer recalls the original state. The cursed form is the only form reality recognizes. At this point, wherever exactly that threshold falls, restoration attempts encounter a fundamental problem. There's nothing left to restore to. The person has been erased not through death, but through replacement. The category they belong to no longer exists in reality's understanding. They are not a person who has been transformed into a monster. They are a monster, only a monster. The category of person they were has been deleted from existence's recognition. This could explain what Geralt meant by hopeless cases. Attempting to cure such a curse does not restore the victim. It destroys them, because there is no victim to restore. Only the curse itself, given independent form. Forcing the curse to break in such circumstances is not salvation but annihilation. What remains when the curse breaks is not a person but nothing. An absence, a gap where something used to exist but no longer does. Some witchers have witnessed this. Accounts circulate through the schools, passed quietly from master to student. Cases where cure was attempted despite warning signs. The Striga kept from her crypt until dawn. The transformation beginning, the body shifting, then the collapse. Not into human form, but into something caught between. Something that lived for minutes or hours in a state that should not exist. Something that suffered in ways that suggested consciousness remained, but could not express itself because the form kept shifting. Unable to settle on either state because neither state was valid according to reality's understanding. Death in such cases came as mercy. What emerged was not victim returned, but victim destroyed by the attempt to return them. These are the hopeless cases, the terminus points, the thresholds beyond which cure becomes destruction. The question becomes, what makes a curse absolute? Based on what is understood about curse mechanics, several factors matter. Duration plays a role. A curse maintained for decades has time to thoroughly erase its victim from reality's memory. Each night the curse persists, reality's understanding of the cursed state solidifies. Each hunt reinforces the monster category. Each feeding makes the Striga more fundamentally Striga and less anything else. But duration alone does not guarantee permanence. Some relatively recent curses prove uncurable, while ancient curses might yield to proper methodology. A curse cast yesterday with absolute conviction might already be impossible to break. A curse cast decades ago with internal contradictions might still contain gaps where cure could take hold. Intent carries more weight than time. A curse cast in momentary rage, however powerful, often contains enough internal contradiction to create reversal opportunities. The caster wanted to hurt, yes, wanted to punish, wanted to destroy. But mixed with that desire might be regret, or fear, or doubt, or some part of them that didn't truly wish for the transformation. These contradictions embed themselves in the curse structure. They create weaknesses, moments where reality's conviction in the cursed state wavers, because the curse itself carries built-in uncertainty. The caster's own doubt becomes part of what reality has been taught, and doubt creates space for alternative understandings. A curse cast with pure, unified intent, with every fiber of the casters being focused on one absolute desire without contradiction or reservation, builds without such weaknesses. The will behind it operates as continuous reinforcement. Even after the caster dies, their absolute conviction persists within the curse itself. Reality has been taught with such clarity, such certainty, such unwavering conviction that the cursed state is true, that no contradictory evidence can shake that teaching. Based on what is understood about curse mechanics, such a curse would require the caster to eliminate all internal contradiction, to want one thing purely, without regret or hesitation or divided purpose, to pour their entire will into a single desired outcome and maintain that focus without wavering. This is extraordinarily difficult for humans to achieve. Emotions are complex. Desires conflict. Someone who hates another person enough to curse them often retains some fragment of care or memory of what the relationship had been. A parent cursing a child carries parental love tangled with rage. A lover cursing a partner carries desire mixed with betrayal. Even hatred born from pure malice often contains fear or pain or some other emotion that prevents the hatred from being absolutely singular. These complexities create gaps in curses, create weaknesses a skilled witcher can exploit. Whether curses truly without any gap actually exist, whether human will can achieve that degree of absolute focus, remains uncertain. But if they do exist, they would explain the hopeless cases Geralt mentioned. Curses so perfectly constructed that the victim ceases to exist, except as a vessel for the curse itself. Curses where reality has been convinced so thoroughly that no alternative understanding remains possible. The consequences of such curses would extend beyond the individual. A curse cast with absolute conviction would not merely transform its victim. The intensity of will required to create such a curse would leave marks on the environment, on the location where the casting occurred, on the places where the cursed individual hunted. Reality, having been convinced so thoroughly of the curse's truth, would remember that conviction even after the immediate target was destroyed. The land itself would carry residue of the transformation. The stones would remember. The soil would remember. The very air would hold traces of the teaching that had occurred. This could explain accounts, rare but persistent, of locations where curses seem to regenerate spontaneously, where one Striga is destroyed only for another to manifest years later in the same place. The curse has not been recast. The original curse has simply found a new vessel, because the curse was never solely about the individual victim. It was about teaching reality that this location produces monsters, that this ground births curses, that anyone who dies here or is born here or dwells here carries the potential to manifest the original curse's intent. Such environmental corruption would make certain locations dangerous beyond the immediate threat of any creature dwelling there. The curse would have soaked into stone and soil. Even after the cursed individual is destroyed, the intention that created the curse persists, waiting for new victims or new opportunities to manifest. The term sometimes used, though more in informal discussion among witchers than in any systematic classification, is curse wells. Locations where curses have progressed beyond affecting individuals to poisoning the environment itself, where the accumulated malevolent intention has altered how magic flows through the area, where entering carries risks that standard protective measures may not address. How curse wells form can be understood through the same principles that govern how curses affect individuals. Reality learns. What begins as an isolated teaching, this person is monster, can spread if reinforced sufficiently. The location where the monster hunts becomes associated with the hunting. The ground where blood spills absorbs the violence. The stones that witness transformation remember what they witnessed. Over time, if the curse persists long enough and manifests violently enough, the location itself begins to reflect cursed characteristics. Plants growing there may exhibit unusual properties. Animals may avoid the area or behave strangely within it. Water drawn from local wells may taste wrong or cause illness. Structures may deteriorate faster than natural decay explains. The curse has taught reality not just that one person is monster, but that this place creates monsters. At that point, destroying the cursed individual solves nothing. The curse has become environmental. It no longer requires a specific victim, but can draw on accumulated malevolence to generate new manifestations. Anyone who dies in the area might rise as Striga. Anyone born there might carry the curse. Anyone who dwells there long enough might gradually transform. Reality slowly teaching them that in this location, human form is temporary and monster form is eventual. This progression explains why Witchers approach Striga contracts with particular caution. The standard methodology remains straightforward. Examine the creature, determine if it exhibits any salvageable human qualities, attempt cure if possible, exterminate if cure proves impossible or too dangerous. But certain signs warn that standard methodology may not apply. Signs that suggest the curse has progressed beyond individual to environmental. A Striga that no longer shows any fear. Fear implies some fragment of human consciousness remains. A Striga that hunts with pure predatory calculation, without hesitation or confusion or any emotional response beyond hunger, suggests the human component has been entirely erased. A Striga that has ceased all behaviors except hunting and feeding. No exploration of old haunts. No response to familiar voices or faces. No moments of hesitation that suggest memory persisting beneath monster instinct. Only the hunt. Only the feed. Only the cycle of killing and returning to the crypt. A Striga around which the environment itself has begun to deteriorate. Plants dying in unnatural patterns. Circles radiating from the crypt, or lines following the creature's regular hunting paths. Stone cracking without cause. Wood rotting faster than moisture explains. Water developing foul tastes or colors. Animals avoiding the area entirely, refusing to enter even when driven. These indicators suggest that the curse has progressed beyond individual transformation. It has begun the slow process of converting the location itself into an extension of the curse's intent. At this stage, even successful cure of the individual accomplishes little. The known cases documented through Witcher knowledge represent only what reaches notice. For every Striga whose existence becomes part of recorded history, others likely hunt in obscurity. Curses cast in remote locations where no Witcher ever travels. Transformations that persist for years, while isolated communities attempt containment through improvised means. Deaths that accumulate slowly enough that they draw no external attention until the situation has progressed well beyond cure. This pattern suggests itself through the gaps in what is recorded. Abandoned settlements occasionally discovered by travelers. Ruins that local populations avoid without clear explanation of why. Stories pass through oral tradition about places that should not be approached after dark, with the specific details lost but the warning preserved. When Witchers do encounter such situations, drawn by rumors that finally spread beyond the immediate area, the common conclusion matches what Geralt told Foltest. Hopeless. The victim has been gone for years. What hunts now is the curse operating autonomously. The transformation progresses in predictable ways, based on observations from cases where intervention did occur early enough to document the stages. Initially, the cursed individual retains fragments of their original personality. Fear of what they have become, confusion about why they feel compelled to hunt, moments of recognition when they encounter familiar faces or places. These fragments gradually erode as the curse establishes itself more thoroughly. The predatory instinct strengthens, the human cognition diminishes. Eventually, nothing remains, except the creature shaped by the curse's intent. How long this process takes varies based on factors that remain incompletely understood. The strength of the original curse, the victim's own will and resistance, the environmental factors surrounding the transformation. Some transitions occur within months, others take years. A few accounts suggest decades-long progressions where the cursed individual retained substantial humanity well into their transformation, only losing it gradually as reality's understanding of them shifted incrementally toward complete monster. but the endpoint remains consistent. Eventually, the person disappears. Only the curse remains, wearing familiar shape but operating according to principles that have nothing to do with human thought or emotion or memory. The old palace at Vizima showed signs of progressing toward becoming such a place. 14 years of the Striga's hunting, 14 years of death soaking intention into ancient stone, 14 years of reality learning that this location breeds monsters. Had the curse continued unchecked, the palace might have reached the threshold where environmental corruption becomes self-sustaining, where the curse no longer requires a specific victim but can draw on accumulated malevolence to generate new manifestations. Geralt's intervention interrupted that progression. The curse was lifted from Ada, but lifting a curse from an individual does not erase what has already seeped into the environment. The old palace continued to carry residue, diminished compared to what it had been during the Striga's active years, but not eliminated. This could explain why the curse returned more easily the second time. When someone obtained Ostrit's diary and recast the curse years later, it found ground already prepared. The environmental corruption that had been building for 14 years, that had been disrupted but not cleansed, provided fertile soil for the curse to take root again. The transformation occurred more quickly. The Striga manifested with greater strength. The curse moved faster because reality already remembered the teaching, already knew how to recognize this person as monster. The second casting merely reminded reality of what it had temporarily forgotten, rather than teaching it something new. Geralt's second encounter with Ada, whether it ended in cure or death, remains deliberately unclear in available accounts, proved more difficult than the first precisely because he faced not just the creature, but the accumulated curse presence in the location itself. The palace remembered what had hunted there, every stone in the crypt, every shadow in the corridors, every drop of blood that had soaked into mortar between flagstones. That collective memory worked against attempts at cure, reinforcing the cursed state, making restoration harder to achieve. This is what makes Strigas dangerous beyond their physical capabilities. They embody someone's refusal to let go, someone's insistence that suffering must continue, someone's demand that the world recognize their pain by inflicting equivalent pain on others, and sometimes that refusal runs too deep for any cure to reach, buries itself too thoroughly in the environment, teaches reality so completely that alternative understandings become impossible. The Striga that would not sleep, that refuses to sleep, that fights against every attempt at peace, represents curse work at its most pernicious. Not the dramatic explosion of power, but the quiet persistence of hatred. Not the spectacular destruction, but the grinding erosion of hope. The slow teaching of reality that some things cannot be fixed, some wounds cannot heal, some hungers cannot be satisfied, but only managed or destroyed. The moon rises over territories whose names change with wars and treaties. Strigas hunt in places marked on no maps, in ruins where kingdoms once stood, in crypts forgotten by the families that built them, in cursed ground where something went wrong in ways the survivors chose not to document. Witchers arrive after problems manifest, after the bodies pile, after the curse has already done its work. They make the hard assessments. They determine what can be saved and what must be destroyed. Sometimes they succeed, sometimes they fail. Sometimes they stand in cursed ruins and recognize that they have arrived too late for cure, but still early enough to prevent worse outcomes. The Striga that would not sleep teaches this lesson, that curses persist, that hatred endures, that even broken curses leave fragments sharp enough to cut. Geralt broke one instance of the pattern, perhaps two, but the pattern continues, because curses are not simply magic effects. They are imposed beliefs. Someone believed, with sufficient conviction to alter reality, that the victim should be monster. That belief does not dissipate when the believer dies. It does not fade when the victim is destroyed. The belief persists as long as reality continues accepting it as valid. Breaking a curse requires convincing reality otherwise. This works when the curse is relatively young, when reality still remembers what came before, when the victim retains enough of their original form that restoration has clear meaning. But when a curse persists for years or decades, when it soaks into the environment and teaches the surrounding world that the cursed state is the true state, when the original victim has been so completely subsumed that nothing remains to restore, at that point, reality has no reason to change its understanding. The cursed state is the natural state. The monster is what the victim truly is. The hunger is not affliction, but identity. This is the truth beneath the folklore, the reality that does not appear in dramatic retellings, the grinding persistence of curses that refuse to break, the Strigas that hunt not just until dawn, but forever, until silver or fire or time finally claims them, and the knowledge that even then, even after destruction, the curse may persist, in the ground, in the ruins, in fragments of intention that refuse to dissipate. The Striga that would not sleep was never just one girl cursed by a jealous courtier. It was the pattern itself, the mechanism by which hatred persists, the process through which curses become permanent features rather than temporary afflictions. Ada was fortunate, not in being cursed, not in spending 14 years as a monster, but in encountering someone capable of exploitation those gaps in her curse, in being saved before she became only what the curse had made her. Most Strigas do not encounter such fortune. They hunt until they are destroyed. They kill until they are killed. And the curses that created them persist long after the bodies turn to ash, waiting in stone and soil for the next opportunity to manifest. This is what the Striga that would not sleep truly represents. Not the dramatic confrontation between witcher and monster, not the triumphant breaking of the curse, but the quiet recognition that some curses are wounds the world does not heal from. Some transformations cannot be reversed. Some hunger never ceases. It persists in cursed ground and corrupted stone, in folklore passed down through generations, in warnings marked on maps, in the gap between what can be saved and what must be destroyed. The moon rises. Somewhere a Striga hunts. The curse continues. And a witcher prepares silver and signs and potions, knowing the next contract might be the one that can be cured, or the one that has progressed past cure into something that can only be destroyed. The assessment is made. The choice is taken. The outcome unfolds. Sometimes enough remains to be saved. Sometimes it does not. Sometimes the answer reveals itself only after the attempt has already been made, and the price has already been paid. For those who wish to understand more about the world the conjunction created, where curses persist and monsters hunt, and the line between victim and villain blurs in darkness, there are more stories to explore. If this exploration of the Striga that would not sleep resonated, consider sharing it with others who appreciate deep dives into the lore that makes the Witcher's world more than simple monster hunting. The mechanics of curses, the ambiguity of cure, the slow corruption of cursed ground. These stories persist because they touch something true, not about monsters and crypts, but about the hungers that drive us, the hatreds that outlive their original purpose, the transformations we undergo, and whether return becomes possible once change progresses too far. The Striga sleeps now, but the moon rises again tomorrow, until someone breaks the pattern, or the pattern wins.